The new motor controller comes with a few additional options to the previous version. Firstly, when you turn it on, it'll ask what language is your preferred language, and it'll operate in English, German, Italian, Spanish or French. And I'm going to stick to English, and I'm going to accept the English language. Then it gives you options for rolling or rumbling. Only use the rumbling option if you have the fulling drum in, and don't use the fulling drum if you are using the felting option. If you choose the felting option, you can continue with an existing product that you may have saved from the night before or the day before, or you can select a new item. The new default settings are 50% speed, 500 cycles, 1.75 forward revolutions and 2.25 reverse revolutions. It's advantageous to have these offset, so then you don't get the roller constantly cycling against itself equally. It's constantly moving a little bit forward or a little bit backwards. And if I turn that on, you see the drive roller is going forward 1 3/4 revolutions and backwards 2.25 revolutions, and it's running at 50% speed. We started at 50% speed so you can just check that everything is secure and settled, but you can very quickly press the button next to speed and adjust it by -5 or +5. In fact, you can't go below 50, but you can go up to 100% or down again if you find that it's too fast. And if we take up to 100%, you'll see that it's spinning much faster. So that's the speed control. I'm going to take it back to a slow speed just so it doesn't vibrate the table too much, because it doesn't have any felting on it. We can change the number of cycles. This is how many cycles the roller will complete before it stops. The default is 500, but we can change it here and say, well, we only want 250. It's done 50 already. In fact, it's done 100 already, and 196 to go. And the cycle count will count down as the total cycles counts up. And if I take the cycle count down to a minimum, when it reaches the end of the cycle, it'll let out an audible beep and it will automatically stop. The cycles is counting how many revolutions the drive roller is doing. And it's completed, and there's an audible beep, and it stops at 150. We can continue and start a new cycle. Usually we would take it off the roller at this stage, inspect the product, wet it down if necessary, soap it if necessary, re-roll it, take it up in a different direction, put it back on, and then begin a new cycle. I'll I'll just stop that, go to the menu, continue existing. I can change the forward rotations by pressing the adjacent key to the forward button, and I can increase the forward rotations up to 3. I can decrease the forward rotations down to 0.5, and the same with reverse. I can increase the forward rotations to 3 and decrease to 0.5. So they're the main settings, and you'll see in some tutorials we talk about the settings a little bit, but that's how they're adjusted. Now, if I'll just move the forward rotations back to 1.75, go back. If I have a particular setting field that I like and I want to keep, I can make it my default setting. I'll go back to use the menu options and go back to the main menu. If I hold this button for 5 or 6 seconds, it goes to my defaults menu. Select next, select next. The motor delay time is the amount of pause between changing forward to reverse. At the moment it's set on 0.5 seconds, and I can make the motor change directions quicker by adjusting this downwards to say 0.2, and it'll make the felting time faster because the pause in the rotations is much quicker. I wouldn't change it to 0.2 for heavy garments. If I was doing something heavy, I would tend to leave it on 0.5 because there's a bit of inertia in the drive roller with the weight of the felt. But if you're doing something light, you could easily take it down to 0.3 or 0.2 and it will felt in a shorter period of time. You can play with that and see what outcome you get yourself. If I choose next, I can change the defaults for felting. I can change my default speed. It is currently 50. Let's say I'm confident and I'm always going to start at 65. Go to the next. Let's say my forward rotations, I only want to be 1.25 and my reverse rotations 1.75. And I only want to felt 250 cycles at a time before stopping. I can then change my fulling, which I'll leave for another time, but I'll exit at that stage. If I go to rolling felt, new item, the new settings that I've put in place are now my default settings. It'll default to a speed of 65, 250 cycles, 1.2, 1.75. So that's how you change the default settings. It is possible to make the roller move in one direction only. I'll go back to my main menu. I'll hold this button to go into my default settings, English language, delay time, rotations. If I change the forward rotations to 0, it doesn't matter what the reverse rotations are set to, because my forward rotation is 0. And if I accept those settings, and my new item has no forward rotation, only reverse rotation, and I press start, my gentle roller will go in one direction only. I've set it to go in reverse only. Now there are only a few reasons why you would want to go into a continuous rotation in one direction or the other, and they're covered in an article on the website. Usually it would be to just bed down a larger piece just for that first few hundred cycles to get it bedded, and then you would go back to the menu, then you would switch it back to normal felting mode, normal oscillating mode, and change your defaults rotation, change it back to what it was before. The next bit I want to show you is the fulling options. Now before fulling, it's always a good idea to press the park roller button. It's not absolutely mandatory. I'll show you what it does and I'll show you why it's not mandatory. If you press the button that says park roller, what it does is it brings the hex drive and brings the motor into a home position. So if I press park roller now, you can't quite see me out of shot, but it just brings the roller into a home position. Now I can move the machine out of home, and I'll press park roller again, and it brings it to a home position. Now I'll show you why that's important in a moment, but first we'll just look at the options. When I select rumbling or fulling and go to new item, there are only two options. There are the speed option, which I press this button and adjust my speed up and down, back, and there's the cycle option, and the default is 250 cycles, and I can say, well, I only want to do 150 cycles, and I press start and it'll start cycling. I'll just put the fulling drum in for you, just bear with me. Now because I have parked the roller, I'm going to try and get my fulling drum in as close to upright as possible with the lock uppermost. Locked. My fulling drum is full of fulling bags and bits and pieces, so you'll hear those rattling around if they're not too noisy. The fulling drum is set to a predetermined 10 revolutions one way and 10 revolutions in the opposite direction. That setting can be adjusted. It does slightly more than 10 because it spends 1 or 2 revolutions ramping up the speed and 1 or 2 revolutions slowing down the speed. I'll now try and demonstrate the park function. If I turn that off and the lock is not uppermost, which means the doors are not uppermost, and I press the park roller button, it will return to the home position. It will return to the park position with the locks on top. Now the reason I say it's not mandatory to do that is because you can actually physically turn your drum as long as you don't do it fast. Try not to interfere with the camera, but you can physically turn your drum upright. So if you haven't parked it before you started, it's not the end of the world. You can manhandle it around, but if you have parked it and it stops in an unparked position, press park roller and it'll bring the top uppermost. Then you can open the latches at either side and open the drum. Close the latches. Now the latch has a slightly double click to it. It's best to get that secondary click. 1, 2, 1, 2, that secondary click means that it is locked in place and won't come undone. Now if I go to my main menu, as I described earlier, hold this button for 5 or 6 seconds, goes to the defaults menu, next, I'm in English, next. I don't want to change the mode to delay. I want the fulling option. If I select the fulling option, I can change the defaults for fulling. I can change the speed, the cycles, or the rotations. The rotations, as I said before, is set to default of 10. You can make it rotate 30 times, 40 times before changing direction. And the minimum is 5 times before changing direction. And this is the forward rotation. So next is the reverse rotation. So you can have it offset. I can't see any reason why you would, but you could have it rotating in forward 10 times, backwards 5 times. But I generally leave the settings the same, and 10 and 10 is quite usable, quite useful. I can change the number of cycles that my default. It counts in lots of 20, starting from 250 as the default. And if I exit from there and go to rumbling, my new default is 150 cycles. I didn't change this. I didn't change the speed. So that's fulling. It's similar to the felting option, but less options to play with. Now I would recommend that you just put the rollers in and you play with the settings. Go into felting, go into a new item, adjust the settings yourself in here and see what it's doing to the rolling machine. Adjust the forward cycles, see what it's doing, and just play around with it, become familiar with it. Play around with holding this button here that allows you to go into the defaults menu, and if you happen to put it on Dutch and you get confused because you don't know what's going on, I shouldn't say Dutch, it's in German of course, then quickly you can get out of there by just going to the main menu, holding the menu button and finding your way back to English. And we're back in English again, unless of course you want German. So play around with it with just the rollers in situ and make sure you're familiar with what it's doing, what the different functions are doing, and yes, good felting.